A Navy SEAL came home to Frost Valley, only to learn his mother had disappeared without a trace. When he stepped into her cabin, he froze. His German shepherd, Bridger, was barking at her empty rocking chair, still swaying as if someone had just been sitting there. On the seat lay a torn piece of her scarf, wrapped around a memory card she must have hidden in fear. Someone took her. Someone in that valley knew why. What he uncovered next will break your heart and make you believe in miracles again. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Comment your country below. The first snow of December drifted lazily over Frost Valley, settling on rooftops like soft white ash. The mountains stood dark and silent behind the town, and the wind carried that sharp early winter bite that crept through even the thickest coat. In the nearby settlement of Coldwater Ridge, Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly on porches, their glow dulled by fog rolling down from the pines. It was the kind of weather where sound traveled strangely, muffled, hesitant, as though the valley itself were holding its breath. Caleb Hartman stepped off the shuttle bus with that breathless quiet pressing against him. At 35, he carried the worn posture of a Navy SEAL who had seen too many deserts, too many nights where danger felt closer than sleep. His dark brown hair was cropped short, his jaw marked by faint stubble, and a thin scar curved under his right ear, a memento from a mission no one talked about. He was built like a man used to discipline. Solid shoulders, steady stance, a readiness in his eyes that never fully faded. Yet under that steel, exhaustion clung to him like frost. Trailing beside him, nose low to the icy ground, walked Bridger, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat thick enough to carry its own winter. Bridger had the sturdy chest and sharp tail of a working dog, but his eyes carried an unusual intelligence. In the field he had been fearless, relentless. Off duty he was loyal, almost gentle. Caleb often joked that Bridger was the closest thing to a partner he'd ever had who didn't argue back. The bus hissed away behind them, leaving the two in the crisp silence of the valley road. Caleb inhaled deeply, letting the air burn its way through his lungs. "Home," he muttered, though it didn't feel like it. Not without Mom. He felt it instantly. The absence, the wrongness in the air like a chair pulled out from a familiar table. Eleanor Hartman had always made Frost Valley feel warm, no matter how deep the winter cut. A woman in her early 60s with soft silver hair often braided loosely over her shoulder, she wore the kind of smile that made neighbors drop their guard. She was tall and slender, always moving quickly as though joy itself pulled her forward. But those who knew her well knew she carried private storms. Old griefs she never fully shared, guilt that shaped her gentle yet overly protective nature. She'd been a school librarian for decades, the kind who remembered every child's name, every fear, every triumph. Caleb had believed she was unshakable. Until now. He and Bridger walked down the road toward the cabin. Frost Valley was small enough that he didn't expect crowds, but something felt different. Curtains shifted when people noticed him. Front doors opened halfway and then shut quickly. The usual holiday cheer was missing, as if the valley had dimmed. When Caleb reached the cabin porch, the wooden steps creaked in a way he didn't recognize. He paused. Bridger froze too, ears tilting forward. Caleb slid the key into the lock. It turned too easily. Inside, cold air greeted him instead of his mother's usual warmth. The cabin lights were off. The air tasted still, abandoned. Caleb scanned the room automatically, letting his training guide him. Nothing overturned, nothing broken. Just empty. Bridger padded forward and stopped beside the rocking chair near the fireplace. The chair rocked gently, though no one had touched it. Caleb's pulse stuttered. Winter draft, he told himself. Just the draft. But Bridger's hackles rose. The dog leaned his nose toward the faded blue sweater draped across the chair, one Eleanor had worn every winter for the past 15 years, knitted by a friend Caleb barely remembered. Bridger sniffed once, then his entire body stiffened. A low growl rattled in his throat, sharp and warning. Caleb crouched beside him, resting a hand on the dog's back. "Easy, boy." But the growl didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Bridger wasn't reacting to a scent of familiarity. He was reacting to the scent of fear. Caleb stood abruptly, the cold now feeling suffocating. He grabbed his phone and stepped outside. Snowflakes stuck to his eyelashes as he dialed Tobias. His older brother answered on the second ring. "Caleb, you're back early. Where's Mom?" Caleb didn't bother with greetings. A pause. Too long. She's in Denver," Tobias replied. "Getting treatment. Said she needed support. It's been rough." "What kind of treatment?" The steel in Caleb's voice was unmistakable. Another silence. "She said it was for her anxiety. She didn't want to be a burden." Caleb pressed a hand to his forehead and closed his eyes. "When did she leave?" 3 weeks ago." Caleb swore under his breath. "And you didn't call me?" "I didn't want to worry you while you were deployed." "I'm her son. How could I not be worried?" The line crackled with the tension they both felt but didn't name. "Tobias, did she tell you she was going? Or did you just find a note?" A shaky exhale came from the other end. "Look, Caleb, things were stressful. She was acting strange. She said she needed space. I thought giving her that was right." But Caleb heard something else beneath his brother's voice. Fear. And guilt. He lowered the phone slowly. "I'm going to ask around the valley." Tobias murmured something, but Caleb hung up. If there was one thing the military had taught him, it was this. People lied more out of fear than malice. And something was scaring his brother. Coldwater Ridge sat just a few minutes outside Frost Valley, more a cluster of houses than a true town. As Caleb walked down its main street, Bridger pacing beside him, he felt eyes following him from behind frosted windows. The snowfall had thickened, blurring the outlines of houses and fences, turning the world into shifting white shapes. He approached the small post office first. Inside stood Marion Blakely, a short woman in her 60s with sandy gray curls and round glasses that made her eyes look perpetually surprised. She had always been kind to Eleanor. "Caleb!" she exclaimed, voice tight as if she'd been expecting him. "Back already?" He nodded. "Have you seen my mother?" The woman's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers toyed nervously with the chain around her neck. "She left for Denver. That's what I heard." Caleb watched her closely. "Who told you that?" "Oh, well, someone did," she stammered. "Maybe Tobias? Or the mail carrier?" She blinked rapidly. "It's all a blur, dear." But her eyes darted to the floor. Someone had told her to say that. He checked 2 more houses, each one giving him the same uneasy half-truths, the same nervous glances, the same rushed excuses. One neighbor claimed Eleanor had left to rest. Another said she needed a break. A third muttered something about doctor's orders before slamming her door. By the time Caleb reached the end of the road, the valley's silence felt loud, like a warning. An elderly woman, bundled in a thick green coat, shuffled down her porch steps. Her white hair whipped in the wind, and her breath puffed in small clouds. This was Doris Keene, one of Eleanor's oldest friends, sharp-tongued but honest, a woman who always seemed unimpressed by secrets. She approached cautiously. "Caleb Hartman." Her voice trembled. "You're finally home." He stepped toward her. "Doris, did you see my mother before she left?" Doris swallowed hard. She didn't leave for any treatment. Her eyes flicked toward the woods behind the houses, where fog twisted between the trees. "Not unless that forest suddenly has hospitals." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" The old woman wrung her gloved hands. The night before she disappeared, there was a storm. Rain coming down like the sky was breaking. She hesitated. I saw her arguing with someone in the trees. Not yelling, just desperate. Begging. His pulse thundered. Who was the other person? I couldn't see, Doris whispered, but the voice, it didn't sound like anyone from here. A gust of wind blew snow between them. Bridger let out a low bark, staring into the tree line as if something waited there, just out of sight. Caleb looked at the woods, then back at Doris. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because, she whispered, the valley doesn't feel safe anymore. A chill traveled down Caleb's spine, one that had nothing to do with the cold. Somewhere in Frost Valley his mother's trail had vanished. And now he knew one thing for certain. Someone here knew why. The forest opened before Caleb like a cathedral of winter shadows, the tall pines stretching upward into a gray sky heavy with snow. The morning was hushed, almost reverent, as though the valley itself held its breath. Bridger moved ahead with his black and tan coat bristling, the 4-year-old German shepherd lowering his nose to the ground with sharp focus. His movements were deliberate, tracing invisible threads left behind by someone the forest had quietly swallowed. Caleb followed him, boots sinking into the soft crust of snow, the cold air burning in his chest with each steady breath. He knew this place. His mother Eleanor had walked these woods with a camera slung over her shoulder, always hunting the perfect play of light across pine needles or the way frost clung to fallen leaves like tiny diamonds. She had taught him as a boy how to move silently so he wouldn't disturb the birds, how to respect the quiet magic the forest carried. But today, that magic felt wrong, distorted, strained, as if the forest was trying to warn him of something. Bridger suddenly stopped and lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. Caleb stepped beside him and saw what had caught the dog's attention, a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods, one Eleanor used often. The snow here was disturbed, not by fresh prints but by something dragged or slid across the ground days ago. Caleb crouched, running his gloved fingers along the faint lines, imagining someone being forced forward or stumbling as they ran. A chill unrelated to the cold slid down his spine. They followed the trail, weaving through the thickening trees. The scent of pine resin mixed with the lingering musk of damp earth as they climbed toward Snow Ridge Mountain. Caleb felt the rise in elevation, the thinness in the air, the way his heartbeat echoed against the vast silence. This was no ordinary walk through the forest. This was a pursuit, a hunt for answers he feared and desperately needed. After nearly an hour, Bridger veered off the path, pulling Caleb toward a small clearing. Hidden between fallen logs and snow-coated brush was an old lean-to shelter, one Caleb remembered soldiers improvising during survival training. The structure looked abandoned at first, its wooden planks weathered and half-collapsed, but as he stepped closer, subtle signs told a different story. Inside, sheltered from the wind, a lighter lay partially buried under a thin layer of frost. When Caleb picked it up, the metal was faintly warm, as though someone had used it not long ago. Beside it stood an easel, its legs crooked, its canvas askew. He brushed the snow from its surface and revealed a half-finished painting. The scene was unmistakably one Eleanor loved, the ridge at dawn, with soft peach light blooming across the valley. The brushstrokes were gentle yet precise, the style hers without a doubt, but the painting looked abandoned mid-stroke, the brush left to dry hard in the cold, a detail that made Caleb's chest tighten. Eleanor would never willingly leave her work unfinished. A glint in the snow caught his eye. Caleb crouched again, pushing aside a pile of brittle pine needles until he uncovered a small silver hairpin. Eleanor's. She had worn it every winter for as long as he could remember, its delicate etchings shaped like a mountain ridge. Finding it here felt like a punch to the gut. He closed his hand around it, the cold metal chilling his palm, and swallowed hard as dread settled like a weight inside him. Footprints appeared near the lean-to, shallow impressions trapped in hardened mud beneath a thin crust of ice. They were disorganized, uneven, signs of someone slipping, sliding. Caleb stepped back and scanned the ground more closely. Drag marks moved from the shelter toward the north, ending near the soft murmur of a narrow forest stream. He followed them to the edge of the water, where the bank had collapsed in a muddy slope. Someone had fallen or been pushed. The thought twisted his stomach with fear. Bridger sniffed aggressively along the waterline, tail stiff and hackles raised. Caleb knelt beside him, trying to decipher the story written in the disturbed earth. The forest felt heavier here, as if holding its secrets too tightly. Behind him, a crunch of snow broke the silence. Caleb rose quickly, hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. But the figure who emerged from the trees was no threat, just an older man in a thick green hunting jacket, his gray beard tangled and his hands rough from years spent outdoors. His name was Lyle Carver, a local hunter, Caleb vaguely remembered from childhood, quiet, wiry, with the kind of sharp eyes that noticed every movement in the woods. Lyle had always kept to himself, more comfortable with wildlife than people. Lyle gave a slow nod. "Didn't think I'd see you back here," he said in a voice textured like gravel. He eyed Caleb, then Bridger, then the disturbed ground near the stream. "You're out here looking for your ma, ain't ya?" Caleb nodded cautiously. "You've heard something." Lyle hesitated, shifting his weight. He was a man who chose words carefully, maybe because years alone in the woods had taught him that speaking too loudly made things run away, including the truth. 3 nights back, Lyle said, I was up near the ridgeline, setting traps before the storm hit. Forest was howling something fierce. Wind was nasty, screaming like a live thing. His gaze drifted toward the dark stretch of pines. But under all that noise, I swear I heard a woman yelling, not like someone calling for help, more like someone being dragged. Caleb felt his chest constrict. What direction? Lyle pointed deeper into the trees, toward a steeper incline where the shadows thickened. Up that way, toward the switchbacks. Thought it was just the wind playing tricks again. This forest, it's been known to mess with a man's head after dark. Caleb recognized the guilt in the older man's voice. Not weakness, but the burden of a witness who wasn't sure what he had heard until it was too late. Caleb stepped closer. If you hear anything else, anything at all, tell me. Lyle nodded. I'll keep an ear out. And Caleb. His gaze sharpened. Be careful. There's something up there that ain't right. The hunter disappeared back into the woods, leaving Caleb standing with Bridger beside the murmuring stream. The wind carried a low groan through the trees, like the forest was grieving. Caleb tucked Eleanor's hairpin safely into his jacket and looked toward the rising path leading up Snow Ridge Mountain. Everything pointed the same direction. Eleanor had come this way. She had not run. She had been taken, and Caleb would follow her trail until there was nothing left to follow. The wind had calmed by the time Caleb and Bridger descended from the Snow Ridge Trail, leaving behind the echoes of disturbed mud, broken branches, and the faint warmth of a lighter that should not have been warm. Coldwater Ridge lay ahead, its dim winter lights trembling behind curtains of drifting snow. As Caleb walked back toward town, the tightness in his chest hardened into something heavier, something shaped like betrayal. Bridger, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and sharp, intelligent eyes, padded close to his leg, every step alert. The dog kept glancing up at him as if reading the storm gathering inside him. They reached the old Hartman house at the edge of the town square just as dusk settled. The windows glowed softly, but the warmth inside felt counterfeit. Tobias was sitting at the kitchen table, his shoulders slouched deeply, the posture of a man caving under invisible weight. Tobias was a 38-year-old white man with sandy brown hair pulled messily back, a scruffy beard, and soft features that had once been gentle but were now shadowed with guilt. He wore a faded flannel shirt and worn work jeans, looking every bit the local mechanic he was. Once, Tobias had been quick to laugh. Now his eyes darted nervously whenever conversations edged too close to truth. Bridger stepped into the doorway and immediately bristled. His body stiffened, ears tall, a low rumble vibrating from his chest. The dog rarely reacted this way unless sensing something deeply wrong. Tobias flinched. "Call him off," he muttered, voice shaking. "He doesn't like me." Caleb didn't call him off. Instead, he stepped forward into the kitchen, snow melting off his boots. "He's reacting to something," Caleb said. "Dogs don't lie." Tobias's eyes flicked down, then away, as though afraid to see what the dog saw. Caleb sat across from him, the chair groaning under the tension. "We found signs up in the Snow Ridge woods," he said quietly, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Mom didn't leave willingly. Something happened to her." Tobias swallowed hard. His hands shook on the table. "Caleb, listen." "No more lies," Caleb cut in sharply. "Not tonight." The silence stretched, broken only by Bridger's low growl and the faint hum of the old refrigerator. Finally, Tobias exhaled, a long, broken release of fear. She told me something," he whispered. "The night before she disappeared." Caleb leaned in, jaw tight. "What did she tell you?" Tobias rubbed his trembling hands together, eyes squeezed shut as if reliving a memory he wished never existed. "She said she found out something dangerous, something about someone we know, someone from this town." Caleb felt the ground beneath him shift. "Who?" Tobias hesitated too long. "Toby." Caleb's voice sharpened. "Who?" Tobias's voice cracked. "A man named Marlowe." Caleb frowned. The name dredged up, a vague memory. Someone mentioned once at the bar, a shadowy figure rumored to deal in things people weren't supposed to know about. Tobias continued, eyes watery. "Mom didn't say much, just that she had proof, that she saw something in the woods she shouldn't have. She was scared, Caleb, really scared." Caleb's stomach twisted, part dread, part fury. "Then why didn't you say this from the beginning?" Tobias lowered his head like a child awaiting punishment. Because I'm in debt to him." Caleb stilled. Tobias continued in a small, broken voice. "I borrowed money. Dumb decisions. Gambling. I kept thinking I could fix it before anyone knew." He gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out debts to the wrong people don't go away." Bridger stepped forward, positioning himself between them as if sensing tensions rising. His fur bristled whenever Tobias moved. Caleb stared at his brother, trying to make sense of the pieces. "So, you thought Mom disappearing was connected to him? And you didn't tell me?" Tobias's voice cracked. "I was scared. If people found out I owed money to a criminal, I'd lose the shop, the house, everything. I thought maybe she left to cool off, or went somewhere safe. I didn't know she was in danger." "But you suspected," Caleb said, "and you still lied." Tobias had no defense. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Bridger paced slowly around the table, nose lifted, analyzing every tremor Tobias gave off. Caleb forced himself to stay controlled. Exploding wouldn't help Eleanor. "Tell me everything about Marlowe," he said finally. "Every detail." Tobias wiped his face on his sleeve. "He's not from here. Comes through town every few months. Tall, dark hair, always wearing a fancy coat that doesn't fit this place. Folks say he buys things quietly. Guns, parts, gear. Never stays long." Tobias looked up, eyes full of dread. "Caleb, if Mom crossed him, I don't know what he'd do." Caleb's chest tightened, but he swallowed the fear. "We'll handle him when the time comes." Tobias nodded weakly, grateful yet ashamed. Caleb stood, ready to leave the suffocating kitchen. Bridger followed instantly, tail stiff and low. As Caleb reached for his coat, Tobias spoke again. "There's something else." Caleb turned. "What now?" Tobias gestured toward the hallway. "Mom's things. I packed up some of them. Didn't know what to do." Caleb and Bridger moved down the corridor, stopping at Eleanor's old sewing room. The door was cracked open. Caleb pushed it wider, revealing boxes stacked neatly inside. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. He crouched and began opening the boxes. Quilts, scarves, old photos, journals filled with sketches of Frost Valley trees. Then, at the bottom of a wooden crate, wrapped in a soft cloth, Caleb found something that made his pulse race. A camera. Eleanor's camera. A heavy, sturdy model she carried everywhere. But when Caleb opened it, his breath caught. The memory card slot was empty. Removed intentionally. Tobias hovered behind him in the doorway, rubbing his arms for warmth. "I found it in the garage," he said, "in an old toolbox. I didn't touch anything else." Caleb examined the camera carefully. No cracks, no damage, just missing the one thing that mattered. The proof. Bridger sniffed the camera, ears pricking. He recognized Eleanor's scent, faint but present. Caleb held the camera to his chest. "Someone took the card," he said quietly. "Someone who didn't want us to see what she photographed." Tobias shifted uncomfortably. "Do you think it's connected to him?" Caleb didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Bridger moved toward the door, tail straight as if urging Caleb out, urging him forward. Tobias spoke from behind, voice trembling. "Caleb, what if she's still out there?" Caleb closed the camera gently and slipped it into his coat. "Then we find her," he said, "no matter what it takes." Tobias nodded, eyes glossy with regret. Bridger growled softly again, not at danger, but at dishonesty. Caleb noticed and exhaled. "He'll get used to you," Caleb muttered, though he wasn't sure he believed it. When Caleb stepped outside into the sharp winter air, Bridger pressed against his leg. Snowflakes landed on the dog's thick coat, melting into dark beads. The quiet street stretched before them, lined with closed shops and distant porch lights. Somewhere in that silence lay the truth. Caleb tightened his gloves, shoulders squared, jaw set with resolve. He didn't know how deep the secrets went, or how dangerous Marlowe might be. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eleanor had discovered something the wrong man wanted hidden. And Caleb would uncover it, piece by piece, until he brought her home. He whispered into the cold night, "We're getting closer, Mom." Bridger barked once, sharp and sure as if answering him. And together they stepped forward into the dark. The first gust hit the town with a mournful howl, rattling loose shutters and bending the pine silhouettes until they looked like trembling giants. Snow spiraled downward in frantic whirls, as though the sky itself had grown desperate. Caleb stood just outside the garage, his breath forming pale ghosts that drifted away and vanished. He held the dust-coated camera tightly in his gloved hands, the empty memory slot staring at him like a silent accusation. Bridger stood beside him. A 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, the animal's ears pricked sharply forward, sensing something in the air that Caleb could not. Neither of them spoke, though both were disturbed by the confession Tobias had given hours earlier. But the storm, growing violent by the minute, pressed a new urgency upon them. Caleb's dark brown hair whipped across his forehead as he zipped his dark green winter jacket higher against the cold. The search would soon be impossible. He knew it. Bridger knew it too. The wind sharpened until it became a blade. Snowflakes stung exposed skin and coated the road in a thickening sheet of white. Caleb reluctantly turned back toward his truck, believing he would have to wait out the blizzard in town, though the thought felt like a betrayal of his mother. His boots crunched mechanically through the snow. Bridger followed, until he didn't. Instead, the dog froze, stiffening like a statue, nostrils flaring in rapid bursts. Then Bridger gave a sudden sharp bark that cut through the roaring storm like a flare in the dark. Caleb spun around, startled, and saw the dog's posture transform from cautious to electrified. Bridger bolted. He launched forward with explosive speed, snow spraying in high arcs from his paws. He ran toward the western ridge where the land rose into broken stone and jagged ledges. "Bridger!" Caleb shouted, but the wind stole the word from his mouth. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted after the dog, boots sinking deep into the snow, air burning in his chest. The world shrank to the sound of his own breath and the pounding of his feet. Until Bridger's bark came again. 3 quick bursts. The dog's signature signal for finding something alive. Hope slammed into Caleb's ribs like a fist. As he ascended the beginning of the ridge, he glimpsed a flicker. Faint, easily mistaken for lightning or reflection. But it wasn't. It pulsed, thready and irregular like someone waving a dying flashlight. Caleb gained speed. His legs felt carved from ice, but adrenaline carried him over the rocks and through the wind that clawed at his face. Bridger was a moving shape of black and tan determination ahead of him, circling a narrow cut in the rock. When Caleb reached the dog, the world narrowed into a jagged crevice where the wind screamed like a wounded thing. And there, barely visible through the whipping snow, a thin, trembling glow flickered on and off. Not natural, not an accident. A signal. Caleb's throat tightened. He crouched beside Bridger, who pressed against him, fur dusted white. The dog growled softly, not in warning, but in urgency. Caleb scanned the ground for clues. Snow had collected around the rocks, but something red tugged at the corner of his vision. He reached down and pried a small cloth from the icy surface. It was a handkerchief, delicate, embroidered with tiny sage-green thread forming his mother's initials. Now torn and stiff with dried blood. The sight of it nearly brought Caleb to his knees. He clenched it tightly, his breath trembling. His mind flashed back to the last time he saw her hold it, wiping her camera lens with a habitual, gentle care. He had teased her for being too attached to old objects. And now, here it was, soaked with a truth he did not want to face. A sharp blast of wind forced him deeper into the crevice. The snow bit at his cheeks, pushing tears from his eyes. Caleb rose and edged toward the pulsing light, shielding his face with his arm. The glow brightened once, twice, then faded again, as though someone were struggling to keep it alive. Bridger stayed shoulder to shoulder with him, the dog's muscles coiled from instinct and concern. Caleb shouted into the abyss, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The wind answered first, a hollow roar. Then, faint, fractured by the storm, something else. A sound that froze his blood. A voice. It drifted through the canyon like a frayed thread. Caleb. He lurched forward, heart hammering. His mother's voice had always held warmth, even when thin with fatigue. But now it sounded distant, wind-torn, as if dragged from another world. Bridger barked, head raised to the sky, confirming he heard it too. The snow thickened until the world became a blur, but Caleb stumbled toward the direction of the voice, gripping the rock wall with one hand. A sudden movement pulled his attention sharply to the left. Emerging from the white haze was a small group of 3 campers huddled near a semi-collapsed tent. They looked like ghosts in heavy winter gear, snow coating them. One of them, a tall white man around 50 with a wind-burned face, approached cautiously. His blue parka fluttered wildly in the wind. His voice was raspy when he spoke. "We heard her," he said. Caleb's eyes widened. "You heard a woman calling?" The camper nodded. "Thought it was echo. The mountains play tricks in storms. But she said the same name you just shouted." Another camper stepped forward. A white woman in her 40s with freckles across her nose and auburn hair tied into a messy bun. Her expression carried deep concern. It didn't sound like the wind. It sounded scared. Caleb felt his pulse race faster. The third camper, a younger white man in his 20s with long blonde hair tucked under a wool cap, added, "She was calling over and over. Then it stopped suddenly." Bridger barked twice, then pressed himself against the rock, edge, sniffing fiercely at the narrowing passage where the light flickered. Caleb followed the dog's movement with frantic urgency. The campers, seeing his desperation, stepped back. They were not antagonists. They were wanderers caught in the wrong storm, frightened and unsure, but honest. The older man gestured shakily. "If someone's trapped down there, you'll need to move fast before the ridge collapses. The wind is shifting the snowpack." Caleb nodded breathlessly, barely able to force the words out. "Thank you." He moved past them, Bridger leading once more. The flickering glow suddenly pulsed brighter, lighting the crevice walls in erratic bursts. Fear and hope collided in Caleb's chest. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped deeper, voice cracking as he called out again. "Mom." The wind swallowed the word whole, but in the brief silence between gusts, the faintest echo answered. Not loud, not clear, but real, and Bridger barked the 3-beat signal again, louder this time as though urging him forward with everything a loyal heart could give. The storm roared, the ridge trembled, and Caleb tightened his grip on the blood-stained handkerchief. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next blast of wind, beyond the pulsing light, was the truth, and he would reach it, or the mountain would break him trying. He pushed deeper into the storm's breath, Bridger leading him into the mouth of danger, guided only by flickering hope and a voice carried by the wind. Caleb pressed deeper into the narrowing gorge, the cold scraping against his cheeks like shards of broken glass. Bridger, the 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, moved ahead with unwavering focus, paws silent on the frozen ground. Their breath rose in pale clouds, fading into the dim winter light as the rock walls tightened around them. Caleb's chest ached with fear. Every step felt like walking toward the edge of a prayer he wasn't sure would be answered. The wind gathered into a mournful howl. Bridger halted abruptly, ears rising, body leaning forward in alert tension. Caleb followed the dog's gaze, and there, beneath a fractured stone ledge, lay a small motionless shape half buried in snow. Eleanor. He scrambled down the rocks, scraping his hands bloody in the rush. She lay curled against the jagged wall, her gray hair tangled across her pale face, her slender frame shaking with cold. Eleanor Hartman had always carried the quiet strength of someone shaped by wilderness and wind, her 60s marked by gentle lines, keen eyes, and a resilience earned through decades behind a camera lens. But tonight, exhaustion clung to her like frost. Caleb's breath broke into a sob, gasp hybrid he'd never made before. He slid down beside her, nearly collapsing as he caught her shoulders. "Mom," he choked. "Mom, I'm here." Her eyelids fluttered slowly, turning toward the familiar voice like a plant leaning to sunlight. "Caleb." Her voice was thin, seduced by the cold, barely a whisper. "I knew you'd come." Bridger pressed his warm body against her legs, whining deeply, his breath fogging the air around her. He nudged her hand gently, as though reminding her the world had not abandoned her. Caleb cupped her freezing cheeks. "You're all right. Stay with me. Stay awake." But Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the opening of the hollow as if fearing more than the storm. Her fingers trembled in a different rhythm, not from cold, but memory. "There was someone following me," she whispered, "in the forest. I didn't mean to see it. I didn't mean to be there." Caleb felt his gut tighten. "Tell me, Mom. Tell me everything." Her breaths grew shorter, but determination sparked in her eyes. A woman who had always believed truth mattered even when it frightened her. "I was photographing the ridge," she said, pausing to gather strength. "Birds, shadows, the usual things. Then I heard men arguing. I hid behind a fallen tree. They were trading something. Cash, packages, illegal, dangerous." She swallowed painfully. One of them was Marlowe. Caleb's heart dropped like a stone. "I took pictures," Eleanor continued, "evidence, and one of them saw me. I ran. I tripped on the slope, fell here." Her hand twitched toward the stone beside her. I hid the memory card. I thought, if anyone found me, they couldn't take it." Caleb stared at the rock. It looked ordinary. 1,000 stones like it littered the ridge, but Bridger moved instantly. The German shepherd sniffed, circled, pressed his paw to a gap beneath the stone, then nosed it open. A tiny memory card lay inside. Caleb exhaled a shaking mixture of awe and gratitude. "Good boy," he whispered, voice cracking. Bridger wagged his tail weakly, still pressed to Eleanor's side. But there was no time to spare. The storm was growing heavier again. The roof of the hollow groaned under the weight of accumulating snow. Caleb wrapped his arms around Eleanor, lifting her carefully. Her body was alarmingly light, chilled to the bone. She winced, but did not resist. "We're going home, Mom," he said, gripping her tightly. The path back was narrower now, the wind howling through it like an angry spirit. Caleb braced himself, moving slowly, shielding Eleanor with his own body. Bridger trotted ahead, checking each step, glancing back constantly with anxious focus. Halfway through the crevice, the wind surged so violently that Caleb nearly lost his footing. Eleanor gasped from the sting of cold air slicing her face. Snow blasted sideways. But then Bridger released a low, sharp bark. Warning, not fear. Caleb leaned into the wall just in time for a surge of loose snow to crash past them, filling the hollow they'd just escaped. If they had stayed half a minute longer, Eleanor would have been buried alive. Caleb muttered a trembling prayer under his breath, holding her closer. "Not today. Please, not today." They emerged from the crevice just as the wind shifted again. The mountainside was still brutal, but no longer blinding. Caleb trudged down the ridge, each step fueled by fear, love, and the wild pound of adrenaline. Bridger stayed glued to Eleanor, guiding Caleb toward the western slope. When town lights became visible through the storm's thinning veil, Caleb felt something collapse inside him, something heavy and dark, replaced by a burning determination. At the edge of town, Tobias was waiting, shivering beneath the overhang of the old ranger station. He ran toward them, nearly stumbling as tears spilled freely down his anxious face. "Mom!" he cried, wrapping his arms around her and Caleb both. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you everything. I didn't know it would get this dangerous." Eleanor pressed her forehead gently against his. "You're here. That's enough." They stood like that for a long moment, 3 silhouettes trembling beneath a storm, held together by relief stronger than fear. Hours later, the memory card flickered to life on the sheriff's office monitor. Sheriff Daniels, a broad-shouldered black man in his late 50s with steady eyes and a calm, commanding presence, leaned forward as the footage played. Crates, cash, Marlowe, illicit business in the shadows of the pines. Daniels exhaled slowly. "This is what we needed. We'll move at dawn." And at dawn, they did. Marlowe and his men were arrested at the forest's edge as sunlight broke across the snow, glinting off the metal cuffs locked around their wrists. That same sunlight spilled over the Hartman cabin porch a few hours later. Eleanor, wrapped in blankets, stood between her sons, Caleb on her left, Tobias on her right, while Bridger lay at their feet, eyes half closed in peace. The storm had passed. The mountains glowed gold. The world felt washed clean. For the first time in a long while, the Hartmans stood together not in fear, but in the quiet aftermath of a miracle, and in that gentle morning light, something new began. In the warm light of the morning, the Hartmans learned that deliverance often arrives in quiet ways. Sometimes God sends strength through the loyalty of a son, sometimes through the courage of a mother, and sometimes through the steady paws of a faithful dog. Miracles are not always loud. They are found in moments when love refuses to give up, even in the heart of a storm. In our everyday lives, we too can hold on to this truth. No night is too cold, no fear too deep, for God to guide us back to safety. If this story touched your spirit, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless everyone who listens to these stories of grace.